all started when Cousteau first brought the aqualung, which later became the scuba equipment that everybody uses now. And it turns out that I was a graduate student at the University of Southern California, and I was studying under a marine geologist by the name of K.O. Emery. And K.O. Emery had me go with him over to the Persian Gulf, and we did some offshore collecting of samples for the military geology group of the U.S. Geological Survey. That's when I was just a graduate student. And then we came back, and down the hall from where we were, there in our office at USC, there was a Frenchman, and he came to us one day and said, would you fellows be interested in breathing underwater and being able to stay underwater? And of course, we were quite excited because as a high school student during World War II, the main source of our protein was from the ocean, and our family ate lobster and abalone, and we had a very broad fish diet. And so we immediately jumped upon this as being a pretty good thing to do. Well, we used it in the swimming pool at USC, and then later on out at Catalina Island, a friend of mine by the name of David Moore had a boat, so we went out and we made a dive out there, and we could stay under, and before all we could do was go down and hold our breath, of course. Well, this allowed us to stay up to an hour underwater. And, we would be back down there freezing to death because the water out in California is cold. But we didn't mind because we could breathe underwater, and of course we could collect a lot of the food, and we brought it back. And so we became known as the underwater group of the USC's Marine Geology Department. And then before I could graduate, it turns out that Dr. K.O. Emery had a roommate by the name of Robert Dietz, and they had gone to school at Illinois together underneath the leading marine geologist in the country, Francis P. Shepard. And he asked me if I'd be interested in coming down and join him with his group as soon as I graduated, and I said yes. And so we went down, and it turns out that Bob Dietz was an active swimmer, and I told him about the aqualung and what we could do by underwater with it, and he said, well, he said, our office is going to be called Seafloor Processes, and I think this is probably a good thing for us to invest in. So he bought the first two regulators that were shipped in from Canada for the U.S. Navy at that time. And we started then diving, and of course there weren't many people using these at that time, so there was another group over at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which was also the location of Dr. Francis P. Shepard's office in marine geology. So we more or less worked back and forth to get with each other. They were primarily interested in biological studies, and we were interested in geology studies. So there was a fellow by the name of Conrad Limbaugh there who was busily putting together programs for the people to dive with the aqualung over there, and so we used to trade back and forth and go out and make dives together because we first saw that we really needed to have the buddy system when we were down diving. So something went wrong, the other person could help you bring the thing back. But so we decided that we'd probably be wise to put together a diving program and a diving training program. So we felt that the way that we learned, which was put the regulator in your mouth, breathe slowly in and out, and don't hold your breath when you come up. That was it. And so we realized there was something more needed. So we read up on all of the work that had been done by Cousteau while he was in the French Navy and the French Navy's research work. And we also were made contact with the experimental diving unit back in Washington, D.C., since I was working for the Navy at that time, called the Navy Electronics Laboratory. And we developed a seafloor studies group where all of us learned how to use the aqualung. And within a period of 2 years, we were routinely making dives to 150 feet in the submarine canyons and offshore. And this was an important training program for us because it allowed us to then see what was actually happening on the seafloor. Before we had scuba, we only had remote means of trying to find out what was happening below. But when we went down, we became part of the ocean. We became part of the processes. We could see the way ripple marks were forming. We could see the way sediment was being carried back and forth and how it was being changed by organisms growing and breaking it down. And also, at the same time, we were geologists. And realization was just coming into being that the marine environment had a lot to relate to ancient rocks. So what we were doing then was actually making a comparative study about what the processes were on the seafloor that we were seeing. And then we'd go back to a rock outcrop on land and would look at these rock outcrops, and instead of looking at them as layer cake sandstone on top of mudstone, etc., we began starting to say, well, that is a lagoonal deposit, that is a dune deposit. And we were then beginning to bring together the knowledge we were getting in the modern and carrying it back to the ancient. So this became quite a very important aspect at the beginning of marine geology and geological studies in the United States. In conclusion, I'd like to say that this has been a very exciting time to be a geologist. We've gone from a point where all of our geology knowledge was primarily developed on land, and we were studying rocks which had been deposited millions and even billions of years ago. By being able to go out and actually become part of the environment, we could actually feel and see the processes as they were moving sediments and as they were being cemented that were responsible for the ancient rocks which we're seeing on land. From this knowledge, which became quite widespread as the field of marine geology grew, we were able then to bring that data to the oil companies, and they are now much more efficient in developing and bringing forth oil deposits than they were before we started at this particular project.